Welcome to Open Business Council Summit and Awards. My name is Jaewon Chun, President of World Smart Cities Forum. World Smart Cities Forum is co-organizing this event for today and actually for 3-day events. The purpose of the planning this forum is to discuss the new standards of smart cities and innovative ecosystem of post-pandemic and during pandemic. And the topic of this session is about the role and importance of innovation and data in the smart cities and governments. So for this constructive discussion on this part, I invited 4 experts from the United States and Europe. So I'd like to introduce one of them. Mr. Gianluca Galletto, he's the Managing Director from Global Futures Group, GFG, from the US, New York City. Can you actually wave your hands? The audience? Okay. And Mr. Robinson Hernandez, Executive Director of Urban Tech Hub in New York City in USA. Yeah, nice to meet you. Mr. Professor Miguel Amaral, he's from Lisbon, Portugal, from University of Lisbon. Finally, we have a gentleman from Chicago, Mr. Michael Johnson, is the Chairman of CEO of Citizens. Then, before the speaker's presentation, I'll just go over to briefly introduce myself and the World Smart Cities Forum to begin with. World Smart Cities Forum is a nonprofit organization based in London, England. Currently, it spreads the philosophy of human-centric small cities in many different countries, including Ukraine, Vietnam, the UK, the US, South Korea, and in Europe, and basically EU Council. Demonstration complex is being built in to demonstrate various technologies and services to be implemented in the cities. In order to realize these initiatives, the World Smart Cities Forum Consortium has received mandates from central government as well as the local governments to prepare an entire master plan and create a special purpose corporation, which is SPC, that operates the smart city projects. World Smart Cities Forum is currently working on a master plan to build the smart city projects based on innovation ecosystem in Vietnam and Ukraine. So you probably maybe hear some progress in Vietnam now, because Vietnam is actually playing a very meaningful role as a center of ASEAN nations, and they're trying to go quantum jump into the next level of their economy and also the digital transformation. So most importantly, World Smart Cities Forum has launched the Smart City Tech Sandbox to strengthen the Hanoi economic sustainable model. Over the next 5 years, more than 1,000 startups from around the world will be invited to XN3 Tech Sandbox platform, among which startups that have passed technology validation through the Hanoi Smart City Challenge Core program, and will be able to participate as builders in Hanoi Smart City projects in the next 5 years. So I think we can actually take advantage of some open tech cluster, just like Urban Tech Hub in New York City. Probably Robinson and Hernandez will actually cover that ecosystem in New York. And I'm also based in London, very famous Level 39 ecosystem in East London, Canary Wharf. So we are trying to build that kind of innovation ecosystem based on the smart city projects around the world. We'd like to invite the pronounced speakers from, for today's session. So I'd like to ask Mr. Robinson Hernandez to cover his presentation and probably maybe share the insight with us. Then after the Robinson Hernandez, I'd like to ask Professor Miguel Amaral for 50 minutes. And the Michael Jensen will be followed by Professor. And lastly, Gianluca Galletto, you're up next. And after your each presentations, we just go jumping into the group panel discussions to, discuss more in details what you have to basically deliver your experience and the insights. So, Robinson, are you ready? You are muted. You are muted, Robinson.
All right. There we go. All right. So let's go ahead. Thank you so much, Peter. I'm going to go ahead and share. Make sure I get this right here. Application, this. All right. Let me know if you can see this. Can you see it? I'm hoping. Okay. So if you don't see this, let me know. Were you guys seeing that or no?
Yes, we're seeing this.
Okay. All right. So now I lost the screen, so wasn't sure. All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about innovation in smart cities, give you a little bit of an overview as to why cities are so focused on trying to address some of the challenges that they experience on a day-to-day basis and how they're trying to leverage technology, or really smart city technology, or urban tech as we call it in New York, how we're trying to leverage this as an opportunity to provide solutions to the day-to-day challenges. And so I apologize. When we created this had a lot of visual things to it, but in the challenges, when we start to look at what cities face, they're numerous. And so I'm not even taking into account what's happening with COVID at the moment. We're really just talking about challenges that cities and urban areas are going to continue to face throughout history in the past and as it's going to progress into the future. And so issues that I'm sure all of us are well aware of: the overcrowding, the congestion, pollution, housing issues, the rents that were associated with it, the living conditions that come with that, low infrastructure services. So do we have enough public transportation systems in place? What does traffic congestion look like? Do we deal with issues of equity? So what does poverty look like? Are we having issues where food distribution isn't equal? Is that a result of unemployment? Is there poor sanitation? Is this a result of high crime rate? And why is crime taking place? Are there health services? And so the cities start to face all of these issues. And these photos are going to really highlight the intensity, the enormity of what we in cities go through. So pollution, we look at the housing stock, we look at traffic, things that are really overwhelming. And then we look at even dealing with garbage. And these are just some of the things that I talked about. And I'm sure that if we were able to have a conversation, all of you would actually add probably 1,000 more items to the challenges that we face when we're engaging in urban environment. And so when we started looking at, well, how do we engage the urban tech or smart city community, we said, who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that we can start to look to help us solve for these challenges? In the past, sometimes this was only government. In the past, sometimes it was only nonprofit organizations. But we realized that the universe is a little bigger than we anticipated. So government, as I mentioned before, state and local government have a very heavy hand in defining what service distribution looks like in urban areas. The federal government also plays its hand, but in most cases, it's the state and local regulatory requirements that dictate how we can operate, how we address some of those challenges. So when we're looking at building code, how does the building of the city actually manifest itself? Well, there's code that's defined by the city. There may be code that's defined by the state as well. And then there's different agencies. How do we look at it from an environmental protection perspective? How do we look at it from fire protection? And so all of these different elements come in, and government can play a very heavy role in defining that. So we start looking at organizations like ours, which are innovation hubs. So as Peter mentioned before, and I'll just go quickly into this, but I oversee an organization focused on urban tech development. It's called the Urban Tech Hub, and we do it in conjunction or in partnership with the City of New York. And the idea is that we, as these organizations that serve as hubs for technology, can help to create this menu of resources and support to startups as well as to corporations that allow us to be able to come up with innovative design to solve for those challenges that I went through before. And so these innovation hubs bring together technology, they create thought leadership, they look at corporations, nonprofits, all of these, and say, how can we figure out solutions to that are out there? And so that's what we've been working on at the Urban Tech Hub, and we're part of a larger organization called Company Ventures. Investors. We know that investors sometimes, in order to make some of these solutions happen, you're going to need to rely on the investor community. And so making sure that the types of solutions that are coming from the startups are actually those that can generate investment from investors. Sometimes we can rely on government for funding, but in many cases, a lot of these startups will go out into the capital market to try to secure funding there. Residents. The residents of the city, of course, are the ones that are going to be impacted on a day-to-day basis. And so how do we find ways of being able to get support or get contribution from them as to, okay, what is it exactly that we need to work on? How do we find ways of making improvements? And also, how are you engaged so that you're part of the solution? And then the last is private sector. And so the private sector, being the startups, the corporations, in trying to get their involvement to realize that it cannot just be driven by government, it cannot just be driven by residents, but that we need the private sector to be part of that. And in fact, looking at this slide, I should have probably reordered it as government, residents, private sector, innovation hubs, and investors. Because that's really how I think it would kind of play itself through when we're looking at all of the different folks that are engaged. And then I'm sure there are other stakeholders that are out there. Just for the purpose of, a brief introduction, I wanted to provide this as our perspective of who we think the stakeholders are when we're looking at how to support innovation, how to support data in the urban tech or smart cities community. And so when we look at urban tech here in New York, and as part of the contract that we have with the city of New York, so we've engaged in a contract with the city of New York to say we're going to provide services that are important for New York City. And the purpose of doing that is to solve for those challenges. And so those sectors that are important to New York, and not to say that there's not so many other things that are out there, are issues like mobility and transportation. How do we find ways of being able to move people quickly when you have such a dense city? Logistics, same thing. How are we moving things? How are we storing goods and services that need to be transported that are coming from all over the world? How do we move that from point to point, from point to point throughout the city, but also recognizing that we're just one spoke out of a larger hub and spoke network that are out there. And so making sure that there's an easy way of being able to bring in the items that we need, and also at the same time being able to take out. Infrastructure and connectivity. So we want to be able to move goods, but we need to make sure that we have that infrastructure and that we also have the connectivity, and connectivity being something that is now considered part of infrastructure, considering the elements of how we are so integrated into technology, to the cloud. All of that has to be built into infrastructure. So infrastructure isn't just the roads themselves, but it's also the quality of our digital infrastructure and making sure that we have ample access to be able to bring all of these different connectivity points. FedEx today, or Federal Express in the US, if you're looking at being able to track when a package can come, you can actually see where that truck is. So you can actually go to the store, go buy your coffee, and get back because you know that that truck is 2 blocks away. It's amazing how we're able to bring all of these different things in and make things a lot more easier as well as more efficient. Open data, an opportunity of being able to share that data so that we have ways of being able to better estimate, to be able to better predict how to provide services. So again, going back to that Federal Express or FedEx example, the data that comes from all of the mobile towers and just being able to track that truck and being able to put it on an open platform so that I can see it makes it a little easier for me to be able to understand. I can also see what traffic congestion looks like in those areas. And so the idea is that open data is another pillar or column of focus that we have for the city of New York, making sure that it's equitable, making sure that it goes out. This is a photo, of course, of San Francisco, but the idea is really, all cities are really looking at ways of being able to share information easily so that we can make it more transparent and more easy to be able to, get information flowing. And then last is me making sure, are we doing this in a sustainable format? Considering all of the climate challenges that we're facing, how do we incorporate clean tech in a way that allows us to be able to mitigate for some of the negative impact that happen as a result of many of the actions that we take? So moving things around from a logistic perspective, creating buildings. Buildings in New York City are one of the highest, I think the biggest contributor to the carbon footprint within the city of New York. And so how do we do this in a more sustainable way? And so for us here in the city of New York, we've identified these as 5 areas that we really want to focus. Of course, there are many other elements of the urban tech or smart cities community, but these are the 5 that we feel are important for the Urban Tech Hub and our partnership with the City of New York. And so we look at New York. I've talked about New York a lot. We've said, okay, well, we're just, urban tech is one piece of this. And so what is the advantage of being able to operate in New York? And how do we find a way of engaging entrepreneurs who are coming up with innovative ways of being able to identify solutions that government or existing companies have been unable to do thus far? And so the innovative community has said, all right, here's how we've been addressing this for X number of years. Is there a different alternative way that makes it easier for us to be able to deliver that service or that product? Is there a more sustainable way? And so New York has an advantage from an innovation perspective. It's, since 2010, it's been the highest recipient of venture capital outside of Silicon Valley. It's even twice that of Boston. And so we're starting to see a lot more engagement action from the venture capital community, and looking at, not only because of our traditional role as a finance hub, and not only in the US, but also across the world, but also an opportunity for us to be able to identify technology within the city that we can deliver funding to. That said, there's always our VC is not in any way focused just on New York companies. We're focused throughout the world. In fact, I was just on another presentation earlier today with a number of Finnish companies from Finland, and we were talking to an investor from my company and figuring out how to provide opportunities to these companies from Finland and coming into the US market. So for us, we're looking at a couple of different things. New York is a strong market, which is why we're so focused on smart cities. It's industry recognizing the breadth of industry power that the city of New York has. And this, again, replicates itself throughout the world. The Shanghais of the world, the Ho Chi Minh cities of the world, the Singapores, all these different cities are clusters of innovation within their respective markets. And so for us, New York, well, we think not only for the US, but also for the world, creates that opportunity for us to be able to bring industry together. Yes, we have challenges as a result of the pandemic, but we think we're going to get through that. Our infrastructure has been heavily invested in. Is there more work to be done? Yes, certainly. We know that. But we've seen, even the Biden administration providing trillions of dollars into supporting infrastructure. So we're very excited about that, being able to reinforce where we are. Our ability to create innovative and diverse companies, the diversity and the density of the city of New York, give us an opportunity to be able to create innovation from a number of different perspectives. And so how do we drive that knowledge and innovation, and how do we drive that? It's by making sure that the source of where those ideas are coming from are as diverse as possible. And so that creates the diversity of the city of New York, the density of the number of people here allow us to continuously create opportunities, and that's what we're super excited about. Tech talent, the opportunity of being in an area where we know that there are very heavy concentrations of talent that are needed to support. That doesn't include just programmers and developers, but that's also looking at what is the legal, the consulting, the media, all of these different components. And then lastly, as I mentioned, VC, just our concentration of investment as a result of being, I'm going to say the financial capital of the world. Sorry, London, but we are. All of those elements really give us an advantage when we're looking at innovation. So those are just different perspectives of what's happening. So what did we do? Why are we relevant within this scheme of what's happening with the urban tech or smart cities realm? We saw some of the challenges that are out there. We saw some of the stakeholders. We're looking at why New York is well positioned to be supportive of smart city development. So the Urban Tech Hub, the organization I work with, is this public-private partnership with the City of New York through what's called the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And our purpose is to try to identify premier growth stage companies that can provide an unrivaled competitive advantage. And so we do that in a couple of ways. And so this is why innovation hubs are relevant to how smart city development takes place. We have space. So there's a co-working element or just being able to provide space. We have a beautiful 1.2 million square foot building, which is roughly, I think it's like 100,000 square meters of space. I used to have the number down. But once people start coming back into buildings, we have a campus that makes it very easy for us to be able to accommodate innovation within one building. So it's the New York City's first vertical tech campus. We house, so first of all, we house a number of startups as well as companies that are involved in the smart cities realm. We go through a vetting process to make sure that these companies are all qualified to be part of the network that we want to create. So if we're looking at urban tech or smart cities, we're not going to, include, a mask company, although masks are important. We're going to really look at, what is the quality of this smart city company? How would they fit within the ecosystem that we're trying to create? We look at dynamic programming, making sure that the programming that's part of what we're trying to offer is relevant to the urban tech community. We see ourselves as thought leaders. And I'll go quickly into, because I know I'm running out of time, into the piloting opportunities that we've developed, and then making sure that we have access to key decision makers with corporates and government agencies, recognizing that sometimes the funding constraints of startups requires collaboration with government and corporates through some of the partnership opportunities that they offer. We think a lot of those come from the ability of being able to create piloting opportunities. That has been one of the underlying opportunities that we use. So I just wanted to go over, I think it's 2 or 3 quick pilot programs of how we collaborate between all of the different stakeholders. The L train is a major subway line in the city of New York that goes from Manhattan to Brooklyn. When it was expected to be down for 15 months, we expected 200,000 riders to be impacted. That was the problem that we identified. We said, is there an opportunity to leverage open data from public and private sources to drive innovation? We did a hackathon. The hackathon came back. The survey says the results came back and said, yes, there are ways, yes, we can do this. For all of the open data that we were able to look at, all of the contributions that came from all of the different companies, we were able to say, yes, ride sharing opportunities exist. Opportunity of developing remote corporate working satellites, which is interesting now in the time of COVID, as well as how do we initiate local and community input to allow us to drive what economic development looks like. And this, for us, when we did this, was the first time that we had 5 major transportation agencies come together to start to say, how do we talk to each other? But how do we make that data? All of us have so much data, open data available. How do we find a way of exchanging this information so that we all learn from it? So this is an example of one pilot that we did. The second was one working with the New York City Housing Authority. And so the New York City Housing Authority is the largest U.S. public housing system in the U.S. It has over 2,600 buildings with over 400,000 residents. The idea was, how do we find ways during a time when the problem is the lack of investment in infrastructure and continued budget cuts, how do we find a way of being able to leverage technology, knowing that technology costs money? And so through a piloting program, a competition that we did where we invited the tech community to come in and say, here's the challenge that we have. How do we develop a solution to this? We realized that IoT could play a very simple and cheap mechanism to helping the NYCHA staff be able to respond to maintenance requests, routine maintenance requests. Is it too hot? Is there flooding? Are the lights off? And so this was an easy way for NYCHA to be involved. The point was, you're quickly and cheaply developing low-risk pilot programs. Sometimes these organizations, either government or large corporations, are not ready to take on a big risk, especially with a startup that hasn't proven itself. So these were ways of being able to say, okay, we're going to create a pilot. Maybe in just this building, we try this technology. That is simple ways of being able to engage government. And then the last was neighborhood challenge, which is, this is related to how do we find ways of being able to engage local businesses that have been impacted by COVID. How do we find a way of connecting them with technology? And so we've created Neighborhood Challenge, and I'm happy to share later on in the comment section a link to it. But the idea is we created a platform that said, here's how small businesses and the tech community can get together to be able to solve for these challenges, recognizing that many times the challenges that small businesses face don't have the support mechanisms that are needed. And so can technology play a role in that? And so this is, you'll be hearing a lot more about this. We actually have a big announcement in May about how we're trying to address all that. So those are some examples. Ongoing challenges from the private and public sectors, as you can see: funding, R&D, liability, market adoption, public sector, procurement, public coordination, bureaucracy, accessibility, community input. All of these are important for us to continue to address, recognizing that there are a lot of challenges that continue to exist. But our hope is that through innovation, through data, we're able to start to introduce concepts that are important to the smart city community. And so that's what we're super excited about. Here's my contact information. And hopefully I didn't go too overboard, but thank you so much, and excited to be part of this panel. All right. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and everything. It was brilliant presentation. So just like you, I'm staying here in New York City. I got stuck myself in the entire year, during COVID-19. So I think that one of the missions we actually doing right now, as of with the entity of World Smart Cities Forum Archive Labs, is actually building the prop tech hub, because as you mentioned, the real estate is kind of the key components of New York City. The landlords of the commercial buildings and apartments, they actually suffer from their businesses throughout this the pandemic era. So that's why the prop tech can give another kind of urban tech hub, or probably something the test bed for both the private sectors and the government sectors to test themselves, and how the city can just go back to the normal, and also bring a lot of business opportunities in throughout this initiatives. So something that we can actually just do together in the near future with Urban Tech Hub anyway. So then we just jumped into the other speaker, I think the Professor Miguel. Are you ready with it?
Yes, yeah. I'm ready.
Okay, so if you have presentation deck, you can feel free.
No, I don't have it. Okay, I'll just speak. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. This is very exciting to talk about these topics with such a nice panel. I'm going to talk more about data and some methodological issues, because of course we are talking about innovation. It's important to measure innovation, and somehow I think we focus a lot on high tech and that kind of innovation, but there are many more issues and concerns, I think, when we talk about innovation. And I would like to bring this perspective on innovation metrics, inputs, outputs, and try to also to bring this dimension of the problem. So when we talk about innovation, we take it for granted, because we all know what innovation is. But if we look in a technical way, of course, there are definitions. There are people working on these topics for many years and making their careers on these topics. So innovation became a discipline, like a topic, both for whether for academics, for practitioners, for policymakers. So it's something that is already nowadays it's well established, and so there are also technical definitions, concepts, and it can be rather complex. It can be very detailed. But for example, if we look at the Oslo Handbook, which is a reference in this type of topic in innovation, innovation is defined as the implementation of a product, which can be a good or a service, a process, a marketing method, or an organizational change that are new or significantly improved in business practices, workplaces, or external relations. So this can give us an idea of how complex can be measuring innovation, because we're talking about many different things, right? Tangible goods, intangible services, processes, production processes, marketing methods, organizational change. So if I change my company, the organizational structure, and if I get to be more productive with this new structure, that is also innovation. But of course, usually in the news, we see much more discussions and information about high tech, because of course those are more, I would say, visible, and also they usually bring very high impact in our lives, right? But I think the innovation is made of radical and incremental steps. So I think that's important. And of course, we know that innovation comes in waves, and it's happening for centuries, right? And so we went from the water power, textiles, commerce, so many centuries ago to steam power, electricity, plastics in the 50s, or digital networks, software, IT in the 90s, clean tech, nanotech, so all biotech, all these waves, they succeed one another. And nowadays we talk a lot about robotics, about blockchain, about all these technologies, and so it's important. And this also gives us an idea about the complexity involved here, if we want to measure innovation. And of course, it's also important to discuss why we want to measure innovation, right? Not just for the sake of measuring, but it's very important also for policy making and all that. So innovation indicators, they are statistical summary measures of some innovation phenomenon. It can be an activity, it can be an output, it can be some expenditure in innovation, etc. So of course, this is related to some kind of population or a sample, or and it's bounded by a time frame, and it's happening in some specific place. So this is so all these makes it very broad, because we are talking about many different contexts in the world. So we had a wonderful presentation about what's happening in New York, and for example, we heard about all these stakeholders, the government, the innovation hubs, the investors, the residents, all these top-down, bottom-up strategies, everything that Robinson mentioned, open data, mobility, logistics, infrastructure. So all these speaks about this complexity, right? So these indicators, they have to be also standardized, because they should allow for comparison between units, because I mentioned many different units, and for example, we should be able to compare countries. That's important for policy making as well. And for example, an aggregate indicator for national innovation expenditures as percentage of GDP, that will correct for the size of different economies. So we have to take into account this standardization as well when we talk about building these indicators, right? Then there are many barriers when we talk about these innovation indicators. So what can and what cannot be measured in innovation? And I'm not talking about specific examples. So my talk is more about more methodological issues and about why do we want to measure innovation, for what, how can we do it, and of course that can be somehow transversal to all the practical examples that we are going to discuss here today. So what are the key barriers? So I need to know why I want to measure innovation. There are some learning and knowledge issues or processes within organizations that are difficult to measure, or they are not non-measurable at all. So how do we measure novelty? So what's our concept of novelty? Is something new to the world, new to the country, to the region, new to some industry, new to some company. So how can we define and measure novelty? So there are many different types of innovation paradigms. Some people look at this novelty issue based on markets. So if the consumer is new or existent, if the product is new or existent, and crossing all these dimensions, you may have incremental innovation, revolutionary or radical innovation, evolutionary innovation. Other people think of innovation as a system. If you have some kind of system, you may change everything in that system, like all the architecture of the system, all the components of the system, and you're talking about something radically new. You may just change small parts of components and architecture, nothing very significant, and in that case you have incremental innovation. Or maybe you just change the architecture but not the rest, so it's architectural innovation. And if you change the components but you keep the architecture of the product, of the system, the same, so you call it modular innovation. So I'm just talking about many different ways of conceptualizing these, which also underlines what we are really talking about, and how difficult it is to really measure these in a very robust way. So I really like this approach where you look at technological progress and you cross it with market impact, and many scholars and practitioners, they look at these in this way. So if you cross all these, you can get these innovations that they are really breakthrough because they have very high technological progress, but in those cases they don't have very high market impact. So it's like a elite, or it's something very experimental, and then you have the game changer innovations when they really have very high, very sophisticated technology involved, and also very high market impact. So you have the disruptive. So you have many different types of categories to look at these. In terms of indicators, because I was talking about that, you have inputs, outputs, and activity. Also, you can measure the processes and innovation activity. So in terms of inputs, you have, for example, R&D expenditure. Firms they have these R&D expenditures. You can look at R&D sales ratios. You can to look at firms. For example, if you talk about an industry or a country, you may look at the ratio of business expenditure on R&D to total production or value added. For countries, also the gross domestic expenditure on R&D to gross domestic product. So you have many indicators that can give you an idea about how these companies, countries, industries are really investing in R&D. So that's an input measure. In terms of outputs, you can talk about patents, for example. Patents are important indicators. However, patents have problems when we use patents to measure innovation, because they measure invention more than innovation, okay? And that's different. So one good indicator is looking at new goods or services, actually looking at real goods or services, that products that people can use and are using, more than patents, which, as I told you, it relates more with invention than innovation. And then we also have processes and activities. So not necessarily inputs or outputs, but what's happening within a company or a region or a country. So you may have in-house R&D, external R&D. You may you have acquisition of advanced machinery, equipment, software, buildings, wherever. So training for innovative activities, personal training to improve products or processes. You may have market research. So this is important. So design. So all types of feasibility studies, testing, industrial engineering. So all these is part of the process, and is also very important for innovation to happen. But of course, I'm talking about mostly about technological innovation, right? There are many types of innovation. So how can we collect this data? How can we really build better indicators, more inclusive indicators, and more reliable, etc.? So we have innovation and related surveys. We have administrative data, trade publications. The internet is a wonderful source. Nowadays, we can just search for a lot of information in the internet. So all these allows us to get more and more information. So I think there's a growing abundance of data generated or available right now online and through many digital environments. And in parallel, we have an increasing ability to automate this collection, right? The codification, the analysis of this data. So I think bringing these two ideas together, I think in the near future, we are going to have new and better innovation indicators. So I think, and that's important, because these indicators are usually designed to inform policy and societal discussions, and to monitor progress towards related policy targets. So this is important. But the indicators themselves, they can also influence the business behavior. So managers, companies, countries may react to these indicators. They will develop new strategies, new policies based on the way they read these results and these indicators. So that's another effect from these type of studies. So I'm about to finish, but just to let you know that there are many good sources nowadays, and I mentioned the Oslo manual in the beginning to talk about the complexity and the definition. So that's a good resource to actually look at all these technical issues if we want to really talk about innovation in a very organized way. And for example, the Community Innovation Survey. I'm living in Lisbon, so I'm a bit more connected to what's happening in Europe rather than the US or other parts of the world. But in Europe, we have the Community Innovation Survey, which is it's from the European Commission, and so it's a survey which provides us with very, very good data. Maybe it's maybe one of the best instruments in the world to collect data on innovation, and because they've been doing this for many years, and they have this longitudinal database on innovation. But there's also the data from Ibero-American countries, from OECD, the OECD Innovation Statistics Database, from UNESCO, from in Africa, there's the New Partnership for Africa's Development. They are also collecting data actively. So things are changing a lot with a lot of data available, but there are still opportunities, right? So, for example, today I was also going to show. I didn't prepare slides. I'm sorry, but I was going to show this chart from the European Innovation Scoreboard, which is an annual report on innovation, very detailed, and they divide these European countries in 4 groups: the modest innovators, the moderate innovators, strong innovators, and innovation leaders. So, for example, Denmark, Finland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Sweden. These are innovation leaders. So these Nordic countries, they are very good at innovation. Then we have Portugal, Austria, Belgium, Estonia, France, Germany, Ireland. So these are strong innovators. Then you have the moderate and the modest. And basically, as I told you, this is very, very relevant for policymaking, because this country, why do these Nordic countries are very good at innovation? Because they really took this Lisbon agenda, this program that was developed by the EU some decades in 2000, I believe. So they took it very seriously. They really invested a very significant percentage of GDP in innovation, right? And so that makes the difference. So innovation is something very serious. Countries really have to invest if they really want to go up in these numbers. But on the same time. At the same time, today I saw this article in a newspaper about the most innovative companies of 2021. And for example, I realized that there's no European companies in the top 10, for example. So they have they rank the 50 most innovative companies, and there's no European companies, only American companies. So that also gives us some food for thought. So what's happening? So but again, starting companies is not the only way we should talk about innovation, because we should concern about, and I'm finishing. We should concern about how these companies are really developed. These ecosystems are developing. And I think in the last presentation we saw this. All these stakeholders. So that's an ecosystem. So what's happening with business incubators? What kind of business incubators should we have if we want to build a smart city? Do we need business incubators? So these kind of questions. What kind of bottom-up, top-down mechanisms are important? What type of innovation does it take to build a smart city? It may not only be tech innovation. Non-tech may be very important. Social innovation is for sure very important. So I created, for example, this social innovation lab at my university. I'm involving engineering students to go out. We went to India, to many places to implement some projects, because they are engineers. They are going to be engineers. They need to know also a lot about social impact, because they can change things. They can change the world. And I'm also actually working a lot with low tech. with frugal innovation. So these are totally different worlds. When we talk about nanotech and very sophisticated, and we talk about low tech, we can do wonderful things with low tech as well. So as I told you, it is very complex. And last idea, what type of data and data access are important to encompass this complexity? And so I think there's a lot of issues to discuss here, and I will finish now and hope to hear some good examples that we can also combine with some of the things that eventually that I discussed, and so that we can have a nice discussion in the end. So thank you very much, and I finished now.
Thank you very much, Professor Miguel. I really appreciated sharing your insights and from the academic perspectives, and also the many different angles. I think the one thing that I actually tried to share with you, because back in 2018 I was hired by the South Korean government, so I was the National Smart City Master Plan. So building up the $6 billion smart city national projects as a master planner. I spent about 60% of my time to preparing for the better, governance systems. And also there was a lack of the specific law to support this kind of initiatives. Because, we have to think about many different types of smart cities and innovation. Because I do believe that the role and function of innovation is highly required in the future communities. And even post-pandemic, the innovation could be appreciated more than actually we received before pandemic. So what is the role of the innovation? Because the innovation is brought by all the disruptive technologies, and even though it's high tech or mid tech and low tech, you name it. The small enterprises actually they're coming over. But the thing is, they don't have any kind of empowerment to bring up their own initiatives into the city, right? So that's why we need to think about. We need to just have the better schemes and better measurements, and also define the indicators and how we can set up the KPIs for the private sectors and government sectors, even the innovators, right? So this is not really easy jobs to do, because if anybody talking about smart cities around the world, is ongoing stuff, and I don't think anybody can actually just define this smart city is very highly successful model around the world. Because even we're talking about smart cities in Europe, it's been only 10 years. In Asia, it's like it's maybe less than 5 years. And some of the leadership of the government, they consider smart city as another new development projects, like kind of new development cities, new city projects. It's not easy to, where to be started, because we have a lot of components to be discussed. For example, where do we actually bring the finance to support these projects? Where we just invite the innovators around the world, because homogeneous ecosystem innovation cannot be successful. When I actually worked with the 1139 back in 2013 and now, so more than 50% of the unicorns, because we have nurtured more than 400 startups over there, and about 13 companies become unicorns. But the environment innovation is totally based on, the diversity. So, and you cannot really give an example which city is much more innovative cities or innovative countries to invite the innovators. But you can actually name some of the cities in Europe, for example, Tallinn, Estonia, Finland, Helsinki, or London, or probably maybe some Dutch cities, including Amsterdam. And probably here in the United States and Silicon Valley, of course. And now Boston is a kind of a rising stars in the East Coast right now. And we're talking about New York City is probably maybe next one to, the benchmark from the London ecosystem, because London is now another example to just chasing that kind of the standard. And of course, we have to talk about Israel ecosystem. For example, in European perspective, they have their fund like the Horizon 2020 to support many different research and ITs and healthcare and collaborative work together with many different countries out of Europe, right? So a smart city is not the kind of specific area of the future initiative for human being. It should be the one platform. So smart cities are actually recognized as just like, normal now, and not specific one. So I do believe that, and every city or every country, they have to find, define their own challenges and programs and the problems that I think that's the beginning point, how we just like to set up the specific model of their own smart cities. Maybe we can actually jump this kind of agenda as one of the discussions later on. So I'll just cut it here. So next speakers, I'd like to invite Michael Johnson. So if you're ready, just let me know.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen.
Okay. You good to go?
Can you see?
Not yet.
All right. How about now?
Yep, I see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. This has been a fascinating discussion, and really, we've heard a lot of discussion about data at a high level and its importance, and we're going to, very quickly now dive into a presentation about data at a lower level. City Zenith is a software company that focuses on something called digital twin technology for cities. And we've been developing this technology now for over a decade and have begun to deploy it in the last few years in countries around the world. And it's taught us a lot of things about what the market, how it's shaping up, and what exactly digital twins are achieving for cities, and what the promise is of digital twins for cities in the future. So for people who aren't familiar with this phenomenon, this technology trend, digital twins are virtual replicas of buildings and infrastructure, and they're connected to all of the data in and around them. And they're used to do a variety of things like optimize design and planning, construction, and ultimately the ongoing operations of buildings and infrastructure assets. So digital twins are interesting because they provide actionable insights for a wide range of stakeholders, from city leadership to departments to contractors to architects and planners to even the residents and tenants in the city. Cities are, of course, today impacted by a number of issues which are data related. We have to build the equivalent or rebuild 10,000 new cities just by 2050 to keep pace with current projections. And we're going to have to do that sustainably and in an integrated fashion in order to be able to achieve those types of goals. The challenge is that cities have so many complex components. How do we integrate all of these complex components into any type of meaningful framework so that we can begin to run analysis that impact planning decisions, that impact ROI decisions, that impact finance decisions, etc. And that is really the goal and the ambition of things like digital twins. They get used across the AEC, which is the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. They get used by the prop tech industry. They get used, of course, by government officials, etc., so on and so forth. Our platform-based approach is really what I think defines the uniqueness of what we do anyway as a company. It's an open, almost SimCity-like platform that provides a holistic view of all types of building and portfolio data, from 3D models to GIS, IoT, open data sets from across the city, used by multiple stakeholders, from, as I mentioned, architects, planners, even to researchers. And clients for this type of application, as I mentioned, range from city governments, where we've done entire cities, to the real estate operators who are building the assets, the infrastructure operators who are designing the core infrastructure, et cetera, even the companies like CBRE and Cushman that are actually operating these assets. So we've seen this type of technology deployed in a number of projects. I'm going to keep it a bit short today, only talk about one of those. One of the more interesting recent projects was something that we've done in Novelty, where uniquely we were asked to help with the design of a particular district of this new capital city in South India, designed by Norman Foster out of London. And the goal was to enable all of the designers, who were, I think, 17 different firms working in 6 different countries, a single common platform from which they could model different housing scenarios and then test, using analytics tools applied in the digital twin, the impact that those various design schemes would have on microclimate conditions, like, for example, average street temperature. In this city being very hot, sought to reduce average street temperature by 8 degrees in summer using this type of technology. And it was interesting because over time, in deploying this tech, we learned a lot of things. The initial goal was to embed a lot of sort of existing public data information. There wasn't a lot because it was a new site, but we did have infrastructure data. We had some of the GIS data from the planners. This gets into the weeds of the data types we were talking about. And then, of course, we had the architectural data. We begin doing things like solar potential analysis and tools like this for the city that would help optimize, basically what's called the solar scheme for the project. There's a lot of type of raw energy potential analysis that was done at this phase, including what we did with this energy analysis. This is the simulations that came out of the microclimate simulation piece. That it shows the results of various types of sims that were produced by the architects. And ultimately, we were in fact able to show by using this technology that we could reduce the impact of these designs by something like 8 degrees Celsius in the heat of summer. So it was a real win, I think, for everyone. We've seen this then deployed, of course, in major infrastructure projects across the UK. This one ran from Oxford to Cambridge. It was a fully integrated project, 103 kilometers running from one side to the other. The first, I think, high-speed bullet train in the UK. And they use a digital twin to aggregate site data to make one effectively single source of truth pool for all the constituents who are working together. And then something more recent that shows off what data can do at a more granular level is something like what we're doing in Orlando with the Sports and Entertainment District, which is near where the Orlando Magic play basketball. And here we have an integrated digital twin, which is providing a complete both visitor experience as well as a planning experience for all the stakeholders involved. And this project is just kind of hot off the press. I think it's about 40% complete now. We've integrated a lot of the core IoT and sensor and other data, which has given life to this. And now we'll begin doing things like measuring microclimates, and energy management systems will be responding. We have an application that's going to be able to direct visitors to parking, to valet their cars, to choose hotel rooms, all these things through a single application that's run off the back of the digital twin. So we can run basically a bunch of different scenarios, from things which are very kind of, call them consumer or tenant facing or resident facing, to things which are much more about engineering and building blocks, etc. That's it. I just wanted to give a quick, sort of peek into the world of what this all looks like. And I appreciate the opportunity to share this work with you. And thank you for the time.
That's great. Actually, the digital twin is very important function to design the smart city, because the smart city initiative actually already built in South Korea, like 2 major cities, like capital city and the largest city in South Korea, and also right now in the capital city in Vietnam, Hanoi, and Kiev and Lviv in Ukraine. They are all actually the digital twin initiative. I mean, that kind of the project is the #1 criteria to be reconsidered in terms of the smart city building. Okay, we can actually just maybe talk more about that after the final speaker's presentation by Gianluca. Galletto?
Gianluca's dead. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. All right. Good, I don't know, evening or afternoon. I'm not sure where everyone is. And anyway, I'm very happy to be with you. So just, I don't really have didn't prepare a presentation like all the other very good speakers. I was traveling, unfortunately, but I have some slides that I just put together that I could show. And so if you allow me, I'm going to do that. Just need to see, I don't know where the StreamYard is. There it is. Okay. So I'll share the video. Okay. Can I do that? Oh, the video. I mean the screen. Sorry.
Just go to the screen in the bottom.
Yeah. And your entire screen. Okay.
Then application.
Yeah. It's not giving me the share that I'm not allowed to share, basically.
No, you're allowed to share.
Permission?
You're allowed to share.
Yeah, but it's not highlighted. The share is gray, is not. So maybe you guys have to give me access. I mean, the permission.
Serafima, are you there to help him out?
Share is gray. What does it mean added to the stream, guys? I don't know. I just have share screen. I share the screen. Okay.
You just go to share screen.
Okay,
right?
and the screen,
You just
share is not highlighted. It's gray, so I can't push screen. Share.
Really?
Okay. Okay, I will do without the whatever. So I just did a lot of work on this server. Well, let me try again. They're saying to share the screen again. The technician here. Let me try again. No, it's not working, guys. It's not working. It's not allowed. So, okay, whatever. All right. So let me talk about say a few things about myself, and also I will try to keep on where we left. So, I run a company called Global Futures Group, which is also based in the Urban Tech Hub where Robinson is. Actually, we've known Robinson, we've known each other for a long time, do a lot of work together. And actually, this is relevant to what I'm about to say. So what we do, we provide advisory to both public and private sector entities on devising what we call smart city strategies, but it's really what the New York definition is of what Robinson gave to all of you, which is urban tech. It's all the challenges that the city faces. It's not just the old definition that I think is completely dead of the IoT and just data and connected devices and just digital services for the population. I think that type of smart city, including all the fancy smart cities that are being built from scratch, I'm not sure are going to be viable anymore in the future. So we work also with private entities, because the private entities also most of the time are those that provide the solution. So we try to be in the middle between public sector and private sector. When, let's say, you want a digital transition in a city that you want to also implement an sustainability transition and improve, let's say, the way mobility affects emissions and etc. So we try to bring also the solutions from the companies that provides. And actually, talking about Portugal, I want to say that one of our I think I don't know if it's the most important, but definitely the one I love the most, probably, client is from Portugal, and is a company that has developed a blockchain-based platform that helps to nudge people's behavior and rewards it in terms of choosing sustainable mobility. So making good choices means you take a bike instead of taking a car. And you avoid emissions, and in that case, you get rewarded. Normally, if you're a good citizen, quote unquote, you take the bike, and nobody cares about you. They only care if you emit, and then they give you a fine, or they try to impose. You have a trading system of carbon credits. So it's mostly based on offsetting. In this case, where's the innovation here? Not just the technology, of course, is important, because you need to embed it in. Let's say when you rent the bike, you need to understand how much emission, how much CO2 you avoided to emit. But in the end, it's really the model that has been invented, how to create these credits, which is based on tokenization. So every time You use it, you avoid emissions, you get a credit, digital credit, you can spend to either buy more services on the same bike sharing platform, or you can use public transportation, or you can buy a Starbucks coffee because they participated, so create an ecosystem. So talking about ecosystems, so what we've done, in my experience, I also was part of the New York City government, and which spearheaded a lot of the initiatives that are now part of the urban tech community and others. But what I think it's a critical portion of any urban environment that wants to become, in the end, more prosperous and more equitable and more diverse, which I think these are extremely important tenets of a smart city, a smart place. And we believe in that, and especially here in New York, is that you need to create a community. And I believe that's what New York has done better than other places. And just to open a parenthesis, New York is not the smartest city in the world at all. In many respects, we're behind. I'm Italian, by the way, so you can see the name. So I also am involved with all European their projects. Europe has been ahead, especially in sustainability, renewable energy, and a lot of things in the countries that have been quoted, like the Nordic especially. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing everything the best way. The same thing that I say to New Yorkers here. There's a bubble in Europe. People think here that everything we do here is the best and number one and the biggest, and it's not true. But what is true is that community, which is creating connections between all the different stakeholders, what Robinson's talked about, I think is extremely important, which I find sometimes I can't find in many European cities. I mean, it depends. But for example, in Italy, there's a lot of innovation happening, but this is an element that's really lacking. And because only by creating a community, and you need the government in some ways to be the central enabler, because it's because of the way it's intrinsic, the way we work in the West, and it needs the convening power. But only by doing that, you understand and you can have a clear visibility of what's happening. And each type of stakeholder has a visibility of what's going on in the city and what's missing and what can be used. So that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to say is that going back to the smart city is think of the building a brand new, incredibly smart city in the middle of the desert. It's dead. It's dead also because with COVID, there's much less money for cities to do incredibly sophisticated projects. I mean, again, here, what's happening in the US is probably a little different because thank God we have an administration that is putting, probably and likely, we'll see what happens with Congress, a lot of money in infrastructure. And understanding that infrastructure is not just bridges and tunnel and roads, it's also broadband, but it's also other types of services that are intangible. Like there's something about like how to provide services to the elderly in this bill. And it's been criticized because they say that's not infrastructure. But as part of transforming a country in a way that some people don't have the ability not only to access the broadband, but because of, let's say, not having the right services because you're elderly or because you're handicapped, whatever that is, you're not going to, even if you have the best infrastructure, if you're not serviced in a certain way, you're not going to be able to access it. So that's clearly, I think, where, but again, cities don't have that money anymore. So they have to think out really clearly how to use their space much better. A lot of space is empty, as you know, and I think very likely is not part of it is going to stay empty because companies, especially large companies, have noticed that they can save a lot of money by keeping the place not fully because they reduce the real estate footprint. Within that, there's a big challenge that is partially that touches on Prof tech that's been mentioned so far. And so the way you build buildings and the way you create circular buildings, and again, New York is behind in this, for example. And but also, I want to say something extremely important is housing. So when we talk about space in real estate, we've seen that the housing crisis is pretty clear, and it's affecting any city that is being successful. It's the more you're successful, the more housing crisis you have, because it attracts more people, more congestion, and prices go up, people get priced down. So look at it in the States, where the highest crisis is San Francisco. Second one probably is New York. Same is happening in other cities. So you have to think that if you cannot provide a roof on someone's people, on people, that's a clear basic need. And if you don't have that, I mean, everything else, I think, is just a moot point. So we have to think in those ways in the future, and I think that's a challenge for everyone. While at the same time, you need people to be in the city because they also spend money, and they spend, they create they make the economy move. Finally, though, my last point is that we have to think about also the way, when we talk about space, it also relates to health. We understood, so that's going to stay. But also, what COVID has told us, and it's not told, but also what's been accelerating is, and in some ways sparking and accelerating, is the reshoring of companies and changes in logistics and supply chain. That is something that's going to create some bottlenecks. It's already creating bottlenecks. And so cities have to think about how to become a little bit more self-reliant in some ways. Because before we created a world that everyone is global, I was traveling like crazy all over the place. It was fun. It was also tiring. But we realized a lot of that travel was not needed. In New York, we had 67 million visitors in 2019. I think it's a little too much. You go to Amsterdam, everybody's going nuts if you live here. So that world, I think, hopefully is not going to exist anymore. But still, you need to try to find ways to provision your food more locally, which is also healthier and more environmentally more friendly. And so create what in some ways they're trying to do in Europe with the 15-minute city, and also New York, they're thinking about that. All very difficult, but I think we can move towards that. Sorry, the last thing I wanted to, because I wanted to show this a couple of slides, but the CTO in New York, I found that what's been doing is also together with people like Robinson and the urban tech communities, trying to provide to accelerate a city that provides better digital services and also better infrastructure and access. I give you a few examples. First of all, again, broadband is critical. 6,000 people in New York don't really have good access to broadband. 600,000 people, 600 people. So this digital master plan provides for how to give access at a low cost. So there's an RFP, and I wanted to show it to you because it's a global community. There's an RFP out to provide that says, like, give us solutions to provide better broadband at cheap and affordable rates. And it's due by the April 27th. So we're close. So if anybody's interested, go to the mayor's office of the chief technology officer in New York. It's easy. You just Google it, you'll find it, and then you'll find the RFP. The other thing is that also they're trying to provide data to use the data to provide, for example, in NYCHA, the public housing and IoT solutions to how do you respond to maintenance requests. Public housing is famous for having a lot of problems. The heat is not working. The air conditioner is not working. Water is not flowing. How do you respond to that? And that's also important. So they've also created this initiative that's worldwide. And another interesting thing that because that's all about, the city cares a lot about creating inclusion. And that's clearly what COVID has accelerated and dramatically shown how, this exclusion has been really, it's become much worse in the last 10, 15 years. But it's also about creating, so you need to work together. And the city has been doing this, and I think trying to, with its convening power, to create this challenge, and also including, for example, in the last point, on how do you use the data, how it's, the city collects a lot of data. Just you move around and you collect, and people give data all the time. But who owns those data? It's important that privately, I mean, not privately, they still belong to the citizen. And so it's very important that they're not used for a profit of one party or another. And so another good thing that's being created is also this alliance with other cities that was started with Barcelona and Amsterdam on digital rights. So it's sort of like, how do we work together when we have a protocol of a certain number of rules and principles about digital rights? Because we have to think about also in the future when everything is digitized, that we have to have a platform of digital rights, almost like human rights. And I think that's something that other cities should be participating in.
Okay, Gianluca. So since the other session is actually waiting the next session, so I think that we need to just wrap up now. So I think that we have the series of the questions that we might actually share together, but this is not the only time. We can actually share our insights in some other time, and we just keep in touch. If you have any questions, also this footage will be shared with all the different group of experts and organizations. So you can actually maybe take a look at them later on. And in the meantime, I can actually call for the other series of meetings to develop our talk or insight sharing, or maybe for potential collaborations. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Miguel, Robinson as well, and Gianluca. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.